Hey everyone, and welcome back to another episode of Indie Game Movement, the podcast that talks about the marketing and business of indie games. I'm Andrew Pappas. I'm going to be your host today, and we're going to be talking about building games and community with purpose. You know, indie devs often wear too many hats, making it hard to give each area like production, marketing, and community the attention it deserves. But what happens when you're stretched too thin? How does that affect your game, your message, and the trust you've built with players? Well, in today's discussion, we'll look at the real world challenges of running indie projects, balancing chaos and creativity by exploring how teams can better align development and communication using practical systems that support both teammates and players. So that's what we're going to be talking about right here today on Indie Game Movement. Hey everyone, and we're back. And today with us, I have Riad Djemili. Did I get that right?
Yeah, that's good.
All right, excellent. Riad, hey, how's it going, man? And thank you so much for being here today.
Yeah, thanks for having me. I'm doing well. Excited to have this conversation.
Excellent. Well, I am as well. Definitely an important one. But folks, before we get into that, for those of you who don't know, Riad is the co-founder and CEO of Machine and Mesh, and the co-founder and CEO of Codex, and also the co-founder of Softladen. And I really need to take a moment and ask, what are all these companies that you are, co-founder of and making cool and awesome things happen with?
Yeah, so Machine Mensch is a indie game studio based in Berlin mostly, or Germany. And Codex is a project management tool for game devs by game devs. And Saftladen is a game developer collective, kind of a co-working space, also based here in Berlin with around 50 members. So my team is part of it, but also we have a couple solo developers and other cool indie companies from Germany.
Wow, that is awesome. So really involved in doing a lot of different things, especially with, your immediate community and really building up the game community in Berlin, it sounds like, in Germany. So really exciting stuff. And I mean, you've been involved with some past projects too, like Mother Machine, the Curious Expedition series, Spec Ops, The Line. I mean, and that's was a little bit more information, like Jaeger, published by 2K Games, Dead Island 2 with Deep Silver, lots of other things. And then, of course, Codex IO, which is that, project management and community tool software you said for devs by devs, which we can't use enough of, right?
That's what? Sorry?
We can't use enough of that types of systems and such, right?
Yeah, I hope so. I mean, we deserve our own tool. That's what we thought. And I've been doing games for 20 years now, which is crazy. So the first couple of years I did like work in AAA, like worked on Spec Ops and Dead Island 2 and some other stuff that never saw a release. And then afterwards, like Machine Mensch is around since 10 or 11 years by now. So, and that's where we did just recently, we did Mother Machine, our newest title.
Excellent. Well, lots of cool and interesting things. And, appreciate you sharing that with us. But we want to get to know you a little bit more. And one of the ways we do that, folks, is with the Q-Box round. And it's just a few random questions I prepared here today for Riad. So, Riad, are you ready for the Q-Box round?
I am. How quickly do I have to respond? I will try.
All right, let's see it. He wants to go lightning fast, it sounds like, folks. So, all right, first is, what was your childhood favorite game?
That must be Street Fighter 2, which also ruined my fighting career because I was at a karate club. Sorry, so I'm responding a bit longer, but I was in a karate club, and then they had a Street Fighter 2 machine put up in the lobby, and then I never went to the karate classes anymore. So while I was playing a karate fighter in the game, I was missing my actual classes, which is I don't know what that tells you about me.
Dedicated.
Yeah.
That's awesome to hear. All right, I'm gonna digress a moment, but I'm curious, how good are you at Street Fighter 2?
I used to be pretty good. I think I beat the game usually. But back then, Street Fighter 2 was a bit buggy as well. There was like one trick
Yes.
where you could just jump at like stand jumping and just kicking while coming down, and you would beat the whole game. Every character in the game. It was crazy.
So I have a colleague that I've worked on some projects with, and he's also like, I think that was probably one of his childhood favorite games too. And he's like very familiar with all those exploits and then all the changes that happen in like Street Fighter 2 Turbo and stuff, to the point I think he was even like competitively playing that game at one point. But anyways, it's a fascinating thing, and I love that story. All right, next is, what advice would you give to someone else that's just starting out?
Maybe depends on their age, but if they're young, I would say just do it. Just be fearless. Just do weird stuff. I think, yeah, when you want to have a longer career, you can still work in AAA stuff later on and like have like responsibilities and so on. But you should use the time when you're like, maybe you're out of school and like doing your first game. Just make it weird. Just be yourself. Have something to say, and don't ask for permission, and just do weird stuff. We need more of that.
I love it. I love it. All right. And last but not least, and the staple here on the show, folks, is, what game are you playing now?
Currently, I'm playing Dredge, which I'm enjoying. It's this like you're like a fisherman and it has like Lovecraft vibes. And I think it's a small team and it's really well done. And I try to play a new game every 3 days at least, just to keep on top of what's coming out and so on. And I've been enjoying this game quite a bit.
I gotta get my hands on that, and I don't know, that's a really good, cool goal. I need to play more games. Between work and kids, it makes it a challenge to do so. But sometimes, like the other day, my daughter was like, "Hey, could you play that game that I like?" And she's asking me to play the game and almost making me. And I don't know, maybe I can incorporate more things to like that to play more. But love that you have that goal, and thank you for sharing all that stuff so we could get to know you a little bit more, Riad. But on that note, now let's get into this conversation, because it's an important one, especially with, the way the games are and stuff and challenges and everything else. And, speaking of which, to kick things off, what's one of the biggest challenges you'd say that, indie teams face today, especially when they're trying to balance, making the game with sharing it? And like, why do you think there's a gap that's there in all of this?
So you mean between making the game and sharing it, right? Like,
Yeah,
why is it
exactly.
so hard to? Yeah, I think it's I mean, most of us that we go into this industry or this craft wanting to make our own dream game, and that's what we enjoy doing, kind of sitting in our basement or I don't know where in your office making games all day long. So few of us would come in usually from the marketing direction and so on. So it feels kind of organic or natural that people just enjoy like programming or drawing or whatever it is, and that the other part, like the marketing part, feels a bit like out of our comfort zone. Because when you share your game, while I'm working on it alone, I'm just like seeing it through my own lens. If I share it, there might be criticism. People might not like it. They might say something negative, and that is scary at times. And then I also feel marketing can be a bit unnatural feeling to people, because I read this phrase, marketing is saying the same thing in a 1,000 different ways.
Yep.
So you have to, you're working on a game and you have to constantly talk about it, right? And like say the kind of trying to find new framings and new lenses through which you can talk about this game. And that feels kind of unnatural. I think if you would be at a party and you would be constantly talking like about the same thing, people would say like, shut the hell up. Like we understand, right? So like marketing is kind of asking this of us, kind of like be constantly like promoting ourselves. And I feel like to most people that feels kind of like unnatural, because you feel like, I'm probably annoying people. Everybody has seen it. But it's really not the case. I think when you push something out on social media or wherever, like such a small fraction of even your own followers see it. And I have, even with friends, people ask me, hey, when is your game coming out? It came out a month ago, right? So even like my friends don't are necessarily up to date, even though I feel like I'm constantly talking about it, I'm constantly promoting it, sending newsletter, social media. But yeah, you only reach a tiny fraction of people. And I feel that's still kind of weird that you feel like, well, I've talked about it once, and probably like people, if I talk about it another time, people might be annoyed. So I think you have to overcome that, and that's not necessarily easy for everybody. So I think that's big explanation. It's just like a area of expertise that a lot of game devs who are coming from this other direction are not really familiar with.
Yeah, you bring up a lot of good points too, because I mean, hey, look, let's face it, the fear behind this is real, right? Like that fear of the unknown, the fear of like being criticized in something, especially for something that you really care about. And this happens to not just people that are new, this happens to people who are like veterans in the industry too. That still occurs. And there's some level of that fear there too. And then the unnatural thing, absolutely, like it people might think you're crazy, right? Sometimes if you're always talking about the same thing and nonstop. But as you were saying that, one example or analogy that came to mind is like, well, think of it if you're in the middle, in the middle of the ocean, right? You could still say the same thing over and over again, but if you're in the same spot, like no one's gonna hear you type thing, or it's like, a very small drop in a big bucket type situation too. So it's all about like framing, I guess, is what you're saying too, is like looking at things in different ways, which I think is really interesting. Because even there's even the unnatural side of it. There's this other side too, where it feels like it might be unauthentic. Like if you're always talking about me with everybody else, which me being, your game, it doesn't come off feeling very good sometimes either.
Yeah, that's true. I think what helps is there are different lenses you can look at, and like when you put something out, it's interesting to people because it's maybe entertaining or insightful. So you can combine that, right? You can share like a tutorial on like modeling or something, and and then you happen to work on the model of your game or something, right? So you can be like, you can make it less weird for yourself by making it really like useful beyond just promoting your game. And I think you can tell another superpower is like telling stories. So thinking about what stories you can tell. And I'm not talking about like the game lore or plot, but I'm talking about even like stories about yourself. Like, why are you making a game? Who are you? Why is this driving you? And why must this game exist? I think if you focus on those things, you can get like out a lot of content that feels really authentic and organic.
Yeah, I love how you just frame those things too, because there are all sorts of different actions and things you can take to frame it in a way where you're still talking about, you're still marketing, but at the same time, you're doing it in, an authentic way, a meaningful way, in a way that can probably, in a lot of cases, resonate with people in different ways. So it's all about perspective, folks, and how you approach those things. Speaking of approaching things, you know, again, we were leading in with like this balance of marketing and sharing, but also like you know getting things done. And when it comes to getting things done, specifically with development, what are you like? I know scope can be like one of the biggest things. So when it comes to that, or even anything dev related, what would you say is the biggest mistake you see indie teams make when it comes to managing their scopes or timelines and everything else?
Yeah, I think actually managing scope is kind of maybe the most important thing overall. So when sometimes I have friends that are not working in the games industry and they know I'm doing games and they approach me and like, I have this idea, you have to listen to it, like it's awesome and so on, and they which is nice, of course, but sometimes I get the feeling they think that having the idea is the hard part, and it's really not. It's I have like a shelf with dozens of game ideas, and even for the games within those games, I have like hundreds of ideas what to do. So that's really not the hard part. The hard part is the opposite. The hard part is keeping it small, restricting yourself, saying no to a lot of things. So I think yeah, the art of making games is really the art of scoping. I talked about Dredge before. Really, I haven't finished it yet, but from what I can tell, they have really good scope because they have like this low poly kind of ship sailing game, and that looks really beautiful. But then when you go to a town, just the characters that you meet are just like 2D portrait art, So they really understood kind of which dimension they can really shine and like make it like really high production quality. And they also realized in which areas they could save money and cut corners. And if you master that, like prioritization and so on, I feel that's the best thing you can do. So yeah, I think saying no, I think in general also like an example is chess. I think chess is kind of the best game in the world. And for me there are a lot of combinations in chess, but if you look really at the rule book, it's very simple. I mean, it's like 1% of the complexity of League of Legends or something, right? And but nobody would say like chess is a bad game for that. The opposite for me. That's my design wisdom kind of, or my approach is the game is done when you cannot remove any rules anymore, not when you cannot add any feature anymore. So for me, it's really just for any game, it's about finding the core, keeping the scope tight. And it sounds trivial, but it's incredibly hard because when you are working on a game and you're passionate about it, you get sidetracked by ideas. There's like, you want to do everything. You also want to include that element of this other favorite game and this game. And you feel maybe it's the last game I will work on. I have to put, I have to put everything in there, and kind of resisting that temptation. It's incredibly hard. If you master it, then you will be successful.
Yeah, I love what you're saying here too, because it really comes down to, being focused. And I know that can be easier said than done, but
Yeah.
being focused, knowing what is the main intent, the main purpose behind that game, and is, a lot of things too. What I see from my perspective as it relates to marketing, I can see it relate to a lot of different things, but it's like, okay, in this scope, you have all these other ideas. You could do this, that, or the other thing, but how much more is it providing value? And then also look at your timeline, right? Like, okay, if I do this, is the value X, Y, or Z or a certain percent? And then what does that do to your timeline? And then you start looking at, hey, if I'm introducing this or that, and then you look at the whole scope and you're like, oh, wait a minute. With just a few ideas, this is now getting blown out of proportion. And then we hear their stories about ambitious projects that took too long and were slow to market and all these other things. It's what you are calling out here is really interesting, because it can creep up on us, right? Hence the term scope creep.
Yeah, it usually does. I mean, you never go into a game thinking like, oh, let me make it too big, right? That's never the goal.
Right, you're right.
You're like it's kind of like optimistic planning, like, oh, this will be tough, but I make it work somehow. And usually everything takes twice as long as you thought, not half the time that you thought. So even like under the best assumptions, you usually end up with this problem. And what you said about marketing, I think that's also very true. Like, when you are trying to make a game for everybody, you are making it for nobody.
Mm-hmm.
If you have like a really tight scope and you really understand what your USPs are, that helps you not just in game design, but tremendously with marketing and finding the right audience for you.
Right. Yeah, exactly. Who you're communicating it with, because if you're cramming so many things or having like, hey, it's a combo of 3 different genres and stuff, well, that might be a little bit challenging. Like, then who is that right audience? If, all those types of things. Very good points. When we were talking about scope and stuff and being focused, obviously, there's things out there like tools and such that can kind of like help us stay on track, keep that focus. And, there's lots of stuff out there, right? Like, there's some traditional tools out there like, Trello, Jira. I mean, we could probably list off a bunch more, that can help. But how aren't these solutions fully addressing the problems that, studios and developers face when it comes to game dev workflows?
Yeah, there are a lot of tools out there, and they're fine. Obviously, we thought there's not the best one out there because we created Codex.io. The problem I have with other tools is that they are often too simple, like Trello. Kind of, we used Trello in the beginning, but we outgrew it. Or they're like super complicated to master, like Jira, Handsoft. I've used a couple of those throughout my career, and I think what we try to do with our tool is make just talking about like being focused, right? That's our advantage here. We are really laser focused on game development, and so we can make a lot of opinionated choices, informed choices on what to include and what not. And that, when you have having worked like for a couple of years in the industry, what I saw at different companies is that you had like basically a armada of producers or project managers that whose job was involved a lot of busy work of like asking people, whipping people kind of to update their tickets, right? That's kind of the running job. But it's true, like nobody enjoys necessarily working with these tools. It feels like filling out a tax form or something.
Yeah.
And that's really a problem. I mean, it's not a simple problem as like, well, just you're paying them so they should do it or something. It's really a problem when you have to run behind people and constantly ask them, please update your project, because if that doesn't happen, or it happens only once a week or once a month, you end up with problems managing your scope, right? So the information is outdated. So your project managers, they cannot plan as well. So this drives up cost. It makes it hard to strategize and so on. So we approach kind of this problem like game developers, and really try to make a tool that's appealing and easy to use and kind of fun to use, because as like with games, with games we cannot force people to play those games. So you play a game voluntarily. So we have to make it really appealing, really intuitive, and so on, or otherwise you bounce off and we never see you again. So I feel like some of the kind of these business companies, they have rested a bit too long on like this idea of like, we don't have to make it really super appealing because people will use it anyway. It's just like, somebody decided, like executive, and then they will have to use it. And we approach it kind of like we have to win our customers the whole time. So I think that's a big difference, and the problem with these tools out there. And also, they usually don't cater to game development, not just in the feature section, but also in terms of integrations. So they don't have usually the integrations that we require, like engine, like Unreal or Unity integrations. They don't have like a Discord integration and so on. So these are all like things that we can do because we know our customers really well, and we don't have to cater to everybody, which is like what most tools are doing.
Yeah, no, you have a great point. And I mean, I remember in the past, my history is also in, working at different marketing agencies. And at one point through that process, I evaluated like, I think at least like 20 different tools at that time. And with the quick thing I learned was simply this: it's like the tools are only as good as are only going to perform and do their job if people are on board with them. So it's like you really got to understand what is the needs, what's helping. And I have a quick follow-up question to that too, because I know you were saying like in your tool, really making it intuitive and appealing, not like saying like force, like you don't want it to be something that's just forced on people, because that's what you just called out to being one of the problems. But how does like intuitive also play into, and appealing also play into, because I've seen this too with other platforms about like gamification. It's like, oh, you get gold coins for updating your task. But I don't know. I'm just curious about that, because I know in some cases it can work, and in others it might not just be as functional as we hope.
Yeah, absolutely. I mean, we stay away from the term gamification because that has like a bad rap, and we don't really have the platform is not gamified in the sense of like you collect coins or something. It's we call it playful, because the foundation of the tool is inspired by trading card games. So your tasks look like trading card
Oh, cool.
cards,
Okay.
and so you can make them visual, you can decorate them. And so on. And we're kind of applying it more at a foundational level. How can we make the whole tool, the whole metaphor, more playful, rather than like slapping on like some score counter on top of like a otherwise boring Excel sheet or something.
I know, because I've seen that. Like there was one actually I saw that was a RPG, management system, and I think it was designed for anybody, right? But still, I was like, oh, this seems cool, but I don't know. Like, I would rather play a game than make a game out of a management system. But no, I mean, just that simple little thing that you called out to, like they look like specific cards, but their function is really from the management perspective. And yeah, and then user experience and all those things, obviously play. And the more intuitive and everything else, it's less of a task or feeling like a chore. And then these systems continue to move forward. Project managers can do their job, all sorts of stuff. I absolutely love that. It sounds great.
Thank you. Yeah, it's just as an example. So we support like runs, we call them. It's kind of like a sprint system, so it's like iterative development. And then if you don't do a task within a run, so it spills over to the next one. That's information we want to show you. So you're realizing, oh, this one is like lagging behind. We want to do it for 4 weeks. It's never getting done. And then but the way we do it is, it gets a beast token. So there's like a beast icon, like a monster, and it has like it's like level 4 if you delay it by like 4 weeks. So that's real information that's really useful for project managers. But we found a way to kind of articulate it in a playful way where it's kind of a little bit funny and so on. But at the core, we always care like about this is like a professional tool. You're trying to make a business out of this, and then we always respect that the general goal is always to have like really make you more productive.
I love that you share that example, because what we were talking about too, in terms of like whether it's development or marketing, like how is the functionality of what you're doing or the purpose also adding value or creating impact? And I think that's one great example of that, right? Like just show the little monster and what level they are, because it's communicative, it has value there and functionality, but it's also like somewhat meaningful and playful and fun. It just, and it's not really a form of gamification. I think it definitely isn't. It's just, I think it's better. Like it's just so much more to it. Anyways, talking about project management, and we know it's the platform, as intuitive and as cool and everything else that it is, it still also depends on who using it and stuff. And also like, kind of the mindset behind here. And in general though, I'm curious, like what project management advice would you give to a team, let's say like just a small team, like of 2 devs versus a team of 20, because those dynamics can shift around quite a bit. So is there any advice at that is it a tool that supports that stuff, or is it something else that's more holistic, that really comes down to a mindset or philosophy concept, if you will?
Well, that's the journey from 2 people to around 20 is exactly the journey I did in the last 10 years or so with this company. So I can say it's like completely different worlds. And it's quite hard. Like I underestimated the difficulty of going from like, on the previous game we were around like 8 people, and then we went to like over 20 on the new project. And that was quite challenging, because a lot of the processes that you had before don't work anymore at this level. And that's really something that, you don't underestimate like how difficult this is. I always think of this Metcalfe's law, I think it's called. It's like the amount of connections that you have between people doesn't grow linear, it rises exponential. So when you have like 2 people, there's like 1 connection between them that you have to manage kind of. If you have 5 people, it's already 10 connections. If you have 12 people, it's 66. So then, I mean, I don't know what's at 20, but it's like probably like hundreds of connections that you have to manage. And so it's so much more difficult to manage a team of 20 people versus 10 people, because at that size, you get like challenges that you have is people are on different levels of understanding of like the project vision, of understanding of the company and so on. So you have to invest and reserve really a lot more time to manage the process. And you have to introduce processes that help you manage that. So I have like, for example, like regular recurring one-on-ones with everybody on the team, where I just check in how they're doing and so on. And sometimes they tell me stuff which I didn't realize, like because the company is big enough for me to miss stuff now, right? And that's really a amazing, and it also plays into project management. So if you're like 20 people, I think you will have much greater need of like managing your information flow, documenting stuff, planning stuff, and so on. If you're two people, you have your desk next to each other. You can just look over. You can talk about things easily. So I would scale my project management needs with that. So if I'm just two people, I would probably, like, if I'm using Codex, I might not even use like the sprint feature or something. I might just pick from the backlog the card that feels like most pressing for the day, and throughout the day we talk anyway about like where we think the game is heading and so on. If you are 20 people, that doesn't work anymore. It's not possible that everybody just picks random stuff, or at least I believe so. You really have to have more planning, have a bigger, like more time horizon to think about stuff, because at that scale, every mistake that you make also costs you so much more. When I worked in AAA, like team was I think 100 people or so, we would some features that we threw away was like the work of like 30 people for 6 months or so, right? So you throw like a feature that costs like literally millions to test and so on. So yeah, the bigger you are, the harder it is to turn the ship around, kind of, or navigate it. So you will need to have more project management, more producers maybe, to manage it.
Yeah, and one thing I'll call out too is what you said earlier. I think summarizes really well. It's really about that managing that information flow, because it's like, especially if you're the lead in whatever capacity, you can't have every little detail coming at you because it's just too much, and you can't. And sometimes where people lower on the chain, and I'm not saying that term to discredit them or anything. They're obviously still valuable to the project, but there's only so much information that they can take as it applies to what they need to get done. So it's really about that flow and managing that flow of information. But it's like, and that's also tricky too, right? Like keeping everybody on the same page, but on the aspects of the page that they need to focus on.
Yeah. Yeah, and you're dealing with humans, right? So I mean,
Yeah.
they have their own ambitions, they have their own dreams, and so on. So you have to help them, empower them, getting there, and so on. So my job has shifted quite a bit. I used to be like game designer, programmer. Now I'm almost just focusing on the team and just making sure that the team is kind of happy and they know what to do. They understand the vision, they understand the purpose, and so on. That has become kind of my main task.
And you know what? I'm glad. I love hearing that, because I think that's something a lot of us, a lot of studios, I think, tend to either forget, overlook, the importance of where everybody else is. What is that general sentiment? And it's not just I think a cultural thing. I think it's also about it's the importance of like really clarifying and making sure everybody understands that vision. Because too often I see it where there's lots of silos created, and then through silos there's disconnect, and when it's disconnect, when the game does finally get out to marketing or to your community or whatever, there could be problems that are really difficult to determine just from the fact that that level of communication and understanding, or just having the team on that same page or share that same vision, isn't there. And then at that point it's really hard to backtrack or backpedal from those things.
Yeah, absolutely, and it's really difficult. And even I sometimes also fail at this. So even if you have the best intentions and you kind of are aware of like issues like that, really it's a lot of effort still like executing on that and really like making sure people are on the same page and they are aware of what's happening. And you need to have like you have to introduce like maybe like something like middle management, like leaders, tech leader, art leadership, and so on. And you have to have like processes for like requesting vacation time and so on. Whereas before, right, if you're like two people or four people or something, it's just you can just say like, hey, I'm off tomorrow, and that's it. If you have like a big team, you have to have a lot more processes, a lot of more guidance on things, and it's challenging for sure.
Yeah, definitely. As we talk about like, the challenging aspects of, keeping, people on the same page, that vision and everything else that comes with that, I'm curious how this can kind of like either translate or relate to, community efforts, even just whether it's involving, awareness and stuff, and how the team's involved. And I'm curious from this perspective, how could you say that developers can create healthy feedback loop between their players with whatever they're sharing, whether it's with their community directly or just creating awareness, let's say on social media. But how does this loop stay healthy among players, but in particularly devs too? So without burning out or overpromising, because I know these things can go hand in hand with what we're trying to
Mhm.
do to maintain a community and beyond.
Yeah, I think I believe in the power of community. I think it's extremely important, especially nowadays with like so many games coming out. So like having a really good community that helps you make the game better and it's like waiting for your game and so on. It's really a superpower. And I have a couple of kind of rules for myself and how I deal with feedback. One is I try to never promise specific things. I mean, this sounds maybe weird, but you never know what happens in your timeline or like things can get delayed. Things maybe you try adding a feature and it's not fun and you cut it and so on. So I assume I never know what will happen. And so if people ask me about, hey, I think you should add a shotgun to your game, I would never say like, oh yeah, it's coming in 3 months or with the next update because I don't know. Like it's like even if I'm currently working on it, maybe there's like a last minute problem before the update. We have to remove it or something. So I always say, yes. I say, for example, we are working on it, or I say that would be awesome. Let us look into it. Things like that. So I'm not saying like you should ignore things. It's very important to acknowledge the feedback, but don't overpromise. And that's by simply not promising anything, basically, beyond like I'm looking into it, which is true, right? I am. And another thing is, interesting phenomenon with feedback is that players or your audience will often phrase kind of feedback in the way of a proposal.
Mm.
So they will like feel like something that's not working, and they will already articulate the potential solution to that and only approach you with the solution. And I feel as game developers, it's really important to take a step back and understanding the pain point behind the solution. So that's always so. If I don't, sometimes it's obvious. If I don't understand it, I try to ask like, why are you requesting this? What is like the issue behind it? What makes you ask for like a shotgun and so on? And maybe then there's like a totally different reason behind. Because if you don't only end up implementing the solutions, you might end up missing out on the bigger picture and like a bigger underlying issue. So I think that's really important to understand that this is often the way people are phrasing things. And then I think, yeah, another thing I don't do is usually defend myself in a way where big or like over explain things. So they ask, for example, hey, add a shotgun. And I might say, oh, yeah, we don't have a shotgun because it's a pirate game and they didn't have shotguns or something. And it makes sense. It seems reasonable, but what I've often had happen is that then people reply with like, well, but like according to this book, they actually had shotguns, or you could put it in a steampunk world, and then it's fine, and then you have to reply again, kind of no, but like, okay, what is this book that you're referring to? Which one is? And it can end up in this loop where you're like going back and forth with a audience member, and it's really like, yeah, I don't find it super helpful usually. Yeah, it's just very time consuming and can be draining, kind of like having to explain yourself over and over, because then the next day another person asks the same question and so on. So I'm thankful for the feedback. I acknowledge it, and usually I say thank you for the feedback, and then move on.
Yeah.
And yeah, I think the last thing is like that's part of having boundaries, but it's also like in general, like if they're like really jerks and so on, if they're like super disruptive, or like they curse at you and so on, then I think you don't need to take that. It's also fine to, if people cross the line, to just say like, we don't want that in our community, and just block them and so on. I feel sometimes game developers, they are quite worried about like, oh no, then they will say I'm censoring stuff and so on. And I think, yeah, that's fair, but you have to draw a line somewhere. It's like not okay to be abused by a random person on the internet and just having to take it.
Yeah, absolutely. And I out of all those examples and everything, it sounds like the don't defend, the don't promise type stuff. It really sounds like the one thing that solves a lot of those problems too is just acknowledging that feedback. Like you mentioned, if you're trying to defend it and provide all these explanations, it's like, well, of course that's going to burn anybody out because it's going to, like you said, it's going to come up again and everything else. And sure, you can create a FAQ if you really wanted to and if it was applicable, but still, you're still going to have that problem of people just doing that. So looking at ways of, like, again, just acknowledging it. And I think a lot of us know when you promise something, players will hold you to it. So there's no need to like, hey, once it's out and available and guaranteed, maybe then you could just like share it with them, but there's no like promise that's happening. It's there, it's delivered. And the pain points, I mean, you calling out to that made me so happy because a lot of times too, you're right. People are looking for solutions that don't need to be found. It's no different than if your car is having a problem, you take it to your mechanic. And I've never suggest this, but I love the phrases that they always share with me is like, well, we don't want to throw parts at it. And I'm like, I don't want you to either, because that's going to cost me more time and money just to keep throwing parts at something if we don't understand what the actual problem is and then addressing it. It's really no different than that. But sometimes, we can let these situations get the best of us. And wow, it's just so many great things what you shared there. And, it just comes down to just, hey, acknowledge it. Be like, yep. And then move on, get right back on track with that timeline, roadmap, and schedule.
Exactly. Yeah.
I'm curious too, as we were talking a lot about, feedback and stuff and how we're working with the community in this capacity. What would you say what role does, transparency play in community trust? Because I know you alluded to something on that a moment ago. And I mean, is there any way that like there are like, let's say, some tools or frameworks or whatever that can support building a kind of relationship with players in terms of building trust? And is it just transparency or are there other things in there too?
Yeah, I think transparency is super helpful in building your community. I mean, that's one of the features that we built into Codex. So you can connect it to your Discord community, and then people can upvote on ideas, and you can publish your roadmap on the web and so on.
Oh, sweet.
So we are trying to provide that transparency because, yeah, I agree. I think it's super important for game developers. And, yeah, I don't want to advertise Codex too much. I'm having this marketing problem again, like talking about the same thing. But as an example, when people provide feedback via our integration, usually what happens, people are shouting something into the void, there's no reaction to it, right?
Yeah.
For us, it becomes kind of like a smart item. So when you leave feedback, you can follow along and you can really see that when the developer's working on it, for when they have scheduled and so on. And that goes a long way of feeling like, I'm being heard and I'm being taken serious, right? And that's it goes back to what we talked about before previously. I think it's really important to just people want to be acknowledged, right? Like they don't necessarily. If somebody asks or has like a complaint, I don't need to share like a 50-page game design document or something. That's like overkill. It's enough to say, thank you for sharing that. I appreciate that you made the time to leave the feedback, and they usually that's all that's enough. Like I had so many occasions of people on the forum being kind of like let's say upset and being like, oh, this lazy developer, like they don't care about the game, it sucks, like how can you make it so bad? And then I would if they go too far, then maybe I should probably not respond. But often then when I respond like, hey, sorry you're upset, like what's the issue, can you explain a bit more about it? Then they would be like, oh my God, I'm your biggest fan, like thank you so much for replying, like I cannot believe you replied to me, and so on. So really I don't know, sometimes I think the audience thinks like these game developers are like on another planet, or they don't see the stuff, and it feels frustrating to like voice these concerns and so on. So I think if you can build that relationship and like show them like, hey, no, I'm reading this stuff actually. I take it to heart and so on. That's going a long way, and that helps also with like if you then go beyond that and even like try to be transparent and tell people what you're working on without promising, right? Like without saying like it's coming by this date necessarily, but if you're just saying like, hey, these are the things that are on my mind, and with this problem, I agree. I'm looking at a solution. I think that can go a long way, and I think that's also superpower of small teams. Actually, I think that's something that people really appreciate. I had a colleague a couple of years ago, and he was having like he had this Facebook group it's back in the day, and he would always write on the Facebook group. We are working on this, we are working on that. And I asked him like, oh, who is this? Like, how big is your team? And he was like, oh, it's just me. And I was like, well, why are you like saying we instead of I? And he was like, oh, I want to appear more professional. And I think that's, nowadays that's I think that's not a good way to approach it. Like if you are like a solo, that's a power. That's really magical. So you should not hide it or like trying to appear more professional. Like you should be on the opposite, like even more authentic and even more truthful and so on.
I think with what you just shared and what we just talked about a moment ago in terms of like how to address feedback with, especially with your community and such, a lot of the problems that arise out of that is us probably looking at a way of, hey, but being transparent is important and it builds that trust, right? And that trust goes to relationships. But I think as you're just calling out now, and what occurred to me is, you know, it's really a matter of how you view that relationship with your players, with your community. Because, trust, yes, transparency can help you develop trust, but there's other things that really can build that relationship more, and looking at trust from that perspective as opposed to like, hey, let's give away more than enough information, because sometimes that could be very bad. In some situations it can be. So but when those situations do happen, but you have that relationship with, let's say, again, I feel like this is almost like not quite a silver bullet, but it's a good tool, is just what you said before, acknowledging that feedback, acknowledging the player, right? Acknowledging that community member, because you just shared one example where you're like, okay, and then you just replied to them, and then they just were like, I'm your biggest fan, and that's all they would cared about. Because it's like, wow, someone's actually acknowledging me and paying attention. And with you sharing that, I'm like, wow, it's like, it maybe some of these things that we think about trust and ways that we address it with like things like transparency, it's really more about the relationships that we have with them as about like what we're sharing with them, but how we're interacting with them. Sorry, there was just a quick observation there, because I think a lot of times like we don't see those things quite that way when we're, in the weeds and still trying to be communicative and everything else, which is obviously still important.
Yeah, it can be tough sometimes. Sometimes you get like negative feedback or like harsh feedback, and then it's you can harden, like you can think of your audience as like, oh, I better not interact with them. But I think that's like most of your audience is probably cool, and they appreciate what you're doing, and so I'm generally very thankful for people that are leaving feedback. And in my experience, it's easier to turn a hater into a fan,
Yes,
than somebody that doesn't care about you into a fan. Because the hater, at least, right, they come to your page, they played the game, they didn't enjoy it, they leave like some remark, hopefully constructive, and if you address it, maybe they turn around and they're like, oh, great that you replied, or great that you fixed this issue. It's much harder to convince somebody that doesn't care about your product, right? That's like not engaged and so on. So that's really much harder. So I appreciate when people comment, even if it's like bad, but they were interested in the game at least.
yeah, and you know what? I think that's one of the best ways you can view that, especially someone that's quote unquote hater, because you're right. It means they were engaged. They did take time. And especially if it was constructive feedback, not something like this stinks and nothing else, right? At least it's showing that there was a level of engagement. And then what you do after that, can make all the difference in the world. And I mean, I know I can't think of the author's name right now, but there's even a book out there more in the broader entrepreneurial space. But the book's titled, I think it's called Love or Hug Your Haters. And it's about that whole process you just talked about in terms of where you can actually turn your haters into your basically your super fans. But when we go back to what you led in before, like the main problem people have in that fear, that's can be a component of fear. It's like, oh, if they hate the game, that just must mean like, yeah, I'm scared to engage with someone like that. But if you look at like what you just said from a perspective of, look, they are engaging, they are interested, they took time to write this constructive feedback, that is a huge indicator that they can definitely be turned. And it doesn't mean make it your life mission, because that's good. If it doesn't happen, whatever, that's how it is. But at the same time, it's an interesting and an important signal to recognize that I think a lot of times, well, we don't, and there's opportunity in those moments. So I love that you called that out too, because again, lots of times we don't think about these things this way. Well, Riad, I know we're coming on time here, and we definitely talked a lot in terms of like, pipeline development cycles, all this stuff. Plus, like, hey, how can we be more open and look at our communities in different ways based on what we discussed? Are there any like tips, suggestions that you can share with our listeners today and take away with?
Yeah, I mean, use Codex.
CTA, folks.
I can recommend that. We have set up a promo code. When you go to codex.io/We Love Podcasts, you get like a discount. So I recommend doing that. I think another general tip is when we talked earlier about like the separation between making and sharing the game. I feel there's like, and I think these have been the main focus of a lot of the industry, like kind of the production side and kind of the distribution side. And I think more and more a third side becomes relevant, which has been a bit underappreciated, which is like the ideation for the game, like which game to make in the first place. I feel I'm guilty of that as well. We spent surprisingly little amount of time really on ideation, on brainstorming, and like testing our market assumption. And you could have like an idea on a whim and then work on it for 3 years or something without ever knowing if it's really like will take off until the end of the 3 years. And that's I think that's something as an industry we need to get better at, like figuring out that ideation phase and how can we test ideas before we sink a lot of energy and time and money into them. And I think that will be really interesting the next couple of years. And you can see it already now with like the amount of solo developers who are doing like really small games, but they're really well scoped and they hit like really like a fantasy or an idea really well. And people have been waiting for that fantasy to be fulfilled. And they have like amazing success. So I think that more and more of the attention of the industry will go towards that phase. So I think, to phrase it in the recommendation, I think spend really time on ideating and testing ideas, like participate in Ludum Dare, game jams, and so on. Release on itch.io small games and see really what works and so on before you dedicate a couple of years maybe into an idea. That would be like a big recommendation. I too often see like first-time game developers go into a idea head first, like that taking like 5 years to create it without really going back to the initial phase and really like thinking like, is there actually like really an audience for it? And when I say is there an audience for it, I don't mean like, oh, I checked on Steam, there was a similar game and was successful, but really like, are you having the right take on it? Is this the right setting? Is this the right scope and so on? Like, trying to figure that out will be very important. And having said that, I also think don't expect success. It's just the state of the industry that becomes more and more hit driven. So if you have to plan if you want to be in the industry for a long time, you will have your fails and your wins will be ups and downs, and it's really like the mastering kind of like your resilience and motivating yourself and so on. That's very important to know how to do. And especially when you're dealing with feedback, for example, some of it can feel so damaging or so scary because you're like people are criticizing your passion project, and you feel kind of like the differentiation between the project and you is kind of like, you feel like people are criticizing you when they're criticizing your project. And so find ways of dealing with that mentally, because it can be quite stressful and draining. So the skill is to keep going and find ways to how to deal with that.
Yeah. I absolutely love it, especially the don't expect success, because I know secretly we always want that, right? And in some different ways, I'm learning this myself. It's not so much of the focus of success. It's like find other things to focus on that the result can be success, right? So it's like, and one, as you were sharing that, what was going through my head was, maybe your metric for success could be focused on learnings, and from the learnings and applying those learnings and then moving on to the next thing. And sometimes learning means failing a lot, but that could be more of the measurement of success. And then how we all see it, like commercial success and that stuff, that could be the byproduct of that, like focus or process or stuff. I don't know, just one random idea. It's going to be different for anybody, but
yeah, I think if you enjoy the journey, then the journey there is already your reward, and then there can be like additional success on top of it. If you put yourself in a position where you're like really like this starving art, or like this hurting yourself and being in kind of like having this painful process, then you become really dependent on, but it has to have been all worth it. It has to have been a huge success at the end. And then you're setting yourself up for a lot of pressure and tension. And so if you can find a way to enjoy the journey and the process, that's really good way to approach it, I think.
Awesome. Well, Riad, I can't thank you enough for everything that you shared with us today. Lots of insightful things. And hey, if people want to connect with you, find out more about Codex, and again, could you please share that code? It will be in the show notes too, folks. But still, if people want to learn more, find out more about Codex, how to sign up, and how to take advantage of that discount, please share some links.
You can go to Codex. So that's CODECKS.io/We Love Podcasts. You can use that and check out Codex. You can go to my personal homepage, Riad.de, which is RIAD.de for Germany, and you can find links there to all my projects like Saftladen and Codex and Machine Mensch, and check out our games as well.
Awesome. Well, Riad, can't thank you enough. It's been a pleasure, honor. Yeah, really appreciate the insights you shared with us today.
Thank you. Yeah, it was a fun conversation, and I hope maybe it's helpful to somebody.
Hey everyone, thank you for listening to another episode of Indie Game Movement. I'm Andrew Pappas, your host, and the show's producer is Mustafa Price. Show notes for this episode can be found by visiting rengenmarketing.com, the number episode of the show. Rengen Marketing is a consulting marketing company that helps indie devs with their marketing efforts. Whether you need guidance with your game's marketing strategy or could use a free marketing plan template, then please visit www.rengenmarketing.com and take action. A special thanks to Dakota Saw for Season 2's opening theme and Melissa Gellis for the new logo design. And as always, thanks for being such great listeners, and we'll see you next time on Indie Game Movement.